2022. One of the all-time cricketing greats, he won the 1992 World Cup. He founded the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf Party in 1996 and served as the Prime Minister of Pakistan. It gives me great pleasure and honor to welcome Imran Khan to give an address to the Oxford Union today with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to address the Oxford Union. I have, I think, spoken about 3 times before. But today is a very critical time in my country's history when I'm speaking to you. So let me just first start by saying why someone who was a cricketer, who didn't really have to do anything after finishing sports, because, you know, we sportsmen, if we reach a certain level in sports, and then once we give up sports, then we don't really have to do anything. All we have to do is talk about that sport for the rest of our lives and earn, pretty good money by just going on television and speaking. So why did, again, someone like me who had no reason to be in politics, I mean, if someone asked me to take politics as a career, I would shoot myself, because the idea of going and asking for votes from people, someone who doesn't need to. I mean, it never has. I've never understood the idea of being a career politician. So I came into politics for one reason, because having played cricket, seen the world, and then contrasting the system in England, because I used to play professional cricket there, and then seeing Pakistan and most of the developing world, I came to this one conclusion. The reasons why nations fail is only one reason: not having rule of law. And the reasons why countries are prosperous is because they have rule of law. So I call my party Movement for Justice, and I launched this 26 years ago and started really from nothing, no political background. And for most of my first 15 years, people mostly laughed at me, because there were 2 entrenched parties. We had a 2-party system, and I came against both the parties. So, and these 2 family parties have ruled Pakistan for 30 years. And in this time, corruption has reached the highest point, whereas our economies, Pakistan's economy, which till 1990 was ahead of all the economies in the subcontinent, from 1990 onwards, when these 2 families took turns to rule Pakistan, we started going down, and we were overtaken by even Bangladesh, which was way behind us. So the reason was simple. We did not have rule of law. And that's why, again, Movement for Justice. And the whole problem, not just with Pakistan, it's with the entire developing world. We have this problem. The ruling elites in our developing world do not want to come under the rule of law. They want a separate law for themselves. So if you cannot bring the powerful under the rule of law, if the powerful are above law, that's how a country becomes eventually a banana republic. The difference, and I was looking at the rule of law index. If you look at Switzerland, Switzerland's rule of law index is 99.9%. Compare that to Nigeria, which has the greatest oil reserves in Africa. The rule of law index in Nigeria is 7%. So similarly, most of the poor countries are under 20%. And almost all the Western democracies are over 90%. So the difference is, just to why I came into politics was to bring the powerful, these 2 corrupt families. Both of them had been dismissed for corruption when I came into politics. Twice they were dismissed for corruption. So then started this struggle. It took me 22 years finally to succeed and come into government. Now, the biggest challenge I faced immediately was that all the mafias associated with these political mafias, they all resisted. They resisted our government the moment we tried to bring them, get them under law. And the more we tried, the more they ganged up. And these two main parties who had opposed each other for almost 30 years, now they ganged up and had a joint front against me. So what happens? I mean, we first, just to give you my 3.5 years in politics, I inherited a government which was bankrupt. We had the biggest current account deficit. And as a result, there was pressure on our currency because our reserves had shrunk to about 9 billion, which is four weeks of our imports. So from there, a bankrupt economy, we steadied the economy the first year. Second year, we were hit by COVID-19, like the whole world was. And so the 2 years, my second and third year, we were grappling with the situation of lockdown, not how to stop the spread of the virus and at the same time save your economy. And the lockdown affected the poor people the most. So we took a very unusual decision at the time. We refused to have a full lockdown. And we started having, what we call smart lockdowns to protect our poor people because there were daily wages. There were people who relied on weekly wage. We had 70% of our workforce was in the informal sector. So had we locked down, we would have had starvation because we already started from a bankrupt economy. But in the end, that worked. And we saved our population from COVID. We had the lowest death rate in the subcontinent. We saved our economy. And so in our third and fourth year, we grew at 5.7% and 6%, which is in 17 years the highest growth rate. And we had record exports by managing our economy in this difficult time. We managed to help the farmers. So anyway, the country was poised sort of for a higher growth rate. And this is all in the economic survey of Pakistan, which is published every year. If you have a chance, look at the figures, because the country was actually growing very quickly. We had a problem which the whole world was post-COVID, and that was the commodity super cycle, the energy prices going up. And then with Ukraine, they went up further. So grappling with this, trying to stop imported inflation, which in UK you're facing exactly the same situation. So at that time, this conspiracy took place. What was this conspiracy? On 6th of March 22, the Under Secretary of State of the US, he meets the Pakistani ambassador in Washington. And, this is an official meeting. There were note takers on both sides. And he says that, look, there's a vote of no confidence coming. At this time, there was no vote of no confidence against me. And he said, if it succeeds if it doesn't succeed against me, in ousting me, then there will be consequences for Pakistan. But if it succeeds, then all will be forgiven. So this arrogant discourse takes place between the ambassador and this Donald Lu, who was the Under Secretary of State in Washington. I read the cipher. Now imagine, here I read this, that he's telling my ambassador, he's telling my ambassador to get rid of me, the Prime Minister. So, I'm a bit, like anyone would be taken aback. The next day, the vote of no confidence is tabled against me. And suddenly about 20 of our parliamentarians start meeting with the opposition, and then openly there was this horse trading taking place, horse trading, where roughly about $1 million were being dished out to buy our M&As, and so our government falls. But what happens after, subsequently, what happens? We are replaced by a government where 60% of the cabinet is on bail on corruption cases. And the two families that had been calling each other crooked and putting each other in jail and corruption cases unite against me, are brought into power, and they then try and suppress this movement because people spontaneously came out in the streets. First time it's happened in our history. So people came out in the streets protesting against this regime change. And they then used brute force. Pakistan hasn't, under democratic government, they have never experienced what in the last 6 months happened. They used, on 25th of May, we had a peaceful protest. The police went into people's houses. Thousands were put in jail. There were women, families, children were, because in our protest, families participate. First time ever, so much women participate in our rallies. So they tear gassed them, they beat them up, and this is all on video. So that happened on the 25th May. But what they thought was that it would scare people. It actually had the opposite effect. So rather than our movement after post my government going, rather than it sort of slowing down, the movement got stronger and stronger. And there were two sets of by-elections, one in July and then one earlier this month. So both by-elections were swept by us, by my political party. So since then what has happened is that this reign of terror is taking place in our country. There's a clampdown on media, unprecedented. There are cases on me, there are terrorism cases. They came to arrest me on a terrorism case, and the case is that one of my close aides was subjected to custodial torture. He was sexually abused. He was stripped naked. So I gave a statement in a rally. I did a protest rally against it, and I said, the judge that sent him back to remand, in other words, when he was tortured, he was presented in front of a judge. Rather than giving him a bail, the judge actually sent him back to the police station who had tortured him in the first place. So I said we would take legal action against the judge. They slapped terrorism case against me. They came to arrest me. So this sort of thing is going on in the country. Then they try to disqualify me because they realize that they can't beat us in elections anymore. So the situation right now in Pakistan is this. There's a clampdown on media. Journalists who support me, who have stood with me, are hounded. One left the country. Two were beaten up. One was put into jail. And then the most tragic thing that has happened, and of all the things it's affected, I'm still affected by it because I've announced my protest march today. Just now I've announced it, that we will be doing a huge, and inshallah, in my belief, it will be the biggest ever protest in our history. A journalist of great integrities, one of the most respected investigative journalists, Arshad Sharif. He was constantly writing about this regime change and how this conspiracy took place, and he constantly wrote against it, and these crooks which have taken over, who, by the way, $5 billion of the corruption cases, they came into power, and through a legislation, person-specific legislation in assembly, they're removing themselves from these corruption cases. It's never happened before. So people who were writing against them were subjected to all sorts of victimization. But the most tragic one was Arshad Sharif. First, they threatened him. They they went into his house and abused his family and threatened him. And this guy, one of the most courageous, bravest journalists I have ever met, I warned him. I found out that his life was under threat. I warned him. Then a second time when I warned him, we managed to get him out of Pakistan. We had a government in KP, so we managed to get him out of Pakistan to Dubai. There his visa was running out. So Pakistan government was wanting him back. So in order to get away from being facing certain death in Pakistan, he then went to Kenya where he didn't need a visa. And day before yesterday, he was murdered, assassinated in Kenya. And that has really, it's a mixture of depression and hatred in this country right now. And hence I've announced my march. And the idea of this protest march is to show the government where the public stands right now. And as I say, I have been, last 6 months I've been on the road and campaigning. And I feel right now that the country is ripe for a soft revolution. I don't think that anyone who tries to get into the way of this change, there are two ways of changing. You can have a soft revolution through ballot box, or there's the other way, which causes destruction in a society. Yes, we are now on the brink. Either we are going to change peacefully or
I'd like to sort of get into some questions before we get into some questions from the audience here at Oxford Union. And I wanted to start off with of course, the biggest news that is surrounding freedom of press at the moment. So we all heard about the recent tragic news of Arshad Sharif's death in Kenya, from yourself as well. And it is a very sort of difficult thing. It brings into question the freedom of press in Pakistan in general. So freedom of press has been a big issue in Pakistan. According to Reporters Without Borders, out of 180 countries, Pakistan was placed 157th. What do you think should be done to uphold freedom of press in Pakistan and to protect freedom of press? I mean, even in addition to this, ARY, which is one of the biggest news channels in Pakistan, was closed, shut down. So I wonder, what do you think would be a solution to this sort of moving forward?
Look, let me say that who is worried from freedom of press? If I'm breaking the law, or if I'm a crook, I'm a head of state and I'm worried that I'm making a lot of money laundering, like most of our leaders have been buying properties abroad in Mayfair and in London and big places, laundering money from this country. So I would want to clamp down on the media. Let me just say, this is the case for the entire developing world. According to the United Nations Secretary General, he set up a panel. That panel is called Fact-Eye Panel. It was to find out why is there a difference, the difference between the rich and the poor countries, why is this increasing? And it came up with startling results. Number one, they said that every year, now you will all be shocked to hear this, every year $1.7 trillion move from the developing world into the developed world, into the richer countries, offshore accounts. $1.7 trillion from poor countries or developing countries moved to offshore accounts, rich countries, properties in London, New York, and big Western capitals. I mean, this is a plunder going on of the developing world at an incredible speed. If anyone who understands the history of the Indian subcontinent, when the East India Company came into to India and started operating and took charge, India was about 23-24% of the world GDP. And by the time, India got its independence, it was, barely 3-4% of the world GDP. So the wealth was stripped off the country. It's exactly what the ruling elites of the developing world are doing right now. They're stripping off the wealth from the poor countries and taking them, as I said, into these tax havens. Now, problem is that I tried 3.5 years I was in power. I tried each time in the United Nations General Assembly. I kept saying that there has to be action taken against this illicit flow of money out of developing world, just like you do of terror financing or like drug money, which affect the Western countries. They must do something to stop this plunder of the developing world. But there is no incentive in the rich countries to do anything, because they benefit from this flow of money. And it's the poor countries which, unfortunately, they do not want to do anything, because sadly, a lot of the leaders of the developing world are laundering money out of their country. So they're also not interested. So what is happening is that the poor people are getting poorer. This gap will increase, and you will have this economic migrants. This is just going to become an epidemic sometime ahead. You will have these people dying and crossing, in these boats trying to get to the well-off countries. Something has to be done to stop this. And I'm afraid the developing world, sooner or later, must realize that this situation cannot go on.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that speaks to generally sort of a problem with sort of the many problems within developing countries as well. But the more particular thing that I sort of intended to touch on was the upholding the freedom of press in Pakistan in general. But one thing that I wanted to particularly mention, following up on that, on my previous question as well, was that during your tenure as the Prime Minister, Pakistan dropped 18 points in press freedom, according to Reporters Without Borders. I was just wondering, what did your government, what sort of steps did they take to uphold freedom of press in your government? And of course, now it's very bad in the state that a journalist is dead in Kenya, and a news channel is shut down. I just reiterate the question of how do we get out of this situation where the press in our country is just not safe? These things that we talk about here will never be sort of brought into light.
Okay, let me just explain to you the difference between what was happening during my time and what is happening now. There was not one journalist that my government ever thought of, forget about persecuting, I mean, even trying to muzzle him. Because if I have nothing to hide, if I'm not corrupt, and if I'm not breaking the country's law, why would I be scared of freedom of press? The people who are scared are the mafias. And this is what is happening right now. These are mafias. The problem we had, and which is why maybe, because what, you say that we went down a few notches. Look, when I took over, we had been going through this war on terror. 80,000 Pakistanis died in this war on terror, which we participated in, which we never should have. It wasn't our war. But as a result, 80,000 Pakistanis died. Right now, there is still terrorism. We still have Pakistanis dying of terrorism, but on the peripheries, not like it was before. But when you're fighting against terrorism, I'm afraid that's when the security agencies, then they take a much stronger role. And the abuses would take place by the security agencies because they felt they were fighting terrorism and they were endangering their soldiers' lives. And so they would be sometimes taking very harsh actions against anyone who criticized the security forces. But those actions were always by the agencies. And the 2-3 times when we found out, and I can give you examples, immediately we took action when, journalists were picked up. But never from the political government, because we had nothing to hide. In fact, the only problem we had was we don't have libel laws. So what was happening is that me as Prime Minister, I was libeled a couple of times. I went to court as a Prime Minister, but even I couldn't get justice because we have a real problem with defamation and libel laws. No one gets convicted here. So what we need freedom of press and responsible press, where if you cross, like in UK, if you cross a certain line, then I should have the ability to go to court and get compensation. And I've been in a libel case in England, and I know how strong the laws is. Unfortunately, this is not the case in Pakistan, which is the problem my government had.
No, absolutely. That puts it into context, especially sort of the transition between governments and the freedom of. But moving on to sort of more recent event, which has been like recent news, is the recent decision by the Pakistani Electoral Commission to disqualify you from being a member of the parliament. Where do you stand on this decision, and do you see yourself successfully running for a re-election in 2023?
When I started playing cricket, and when children and as boys we used to play cricket. So when the other team used to be losing, a lot of the times the boys would just pick up the stumps and run away and said, "We are not playing anymore." Now this is exactly what's happening right now. In 2 by-elections which we've competed, it's never happened before that sitting governments have been routed in the by-election. It is because of massive public turnout. And it's also because, despite the fact that the election commissioner is completely biased, it's not even biased, he's just part of their team. It's like them playing with their own very biased umpire. Now, and I'll just give you an example. 9 times the election commissioner has given decisions against us. 9 times we've gone to the court who've overturned the decisions because they've been so biased. This thing of my disqualification, it is just, it is unbelievable. In fact, I'm going to do a defamation case against this election commissioner because it will never stand in a court of law. And we are waiting, we are already in court, we are waiting for the full judgment has just come. It is, I won't go into details, but it is just a joke what he's done. Not just that, there were 2 cases they are trying to disqualify me. One is a funding case, a funding of the political party. We are the only political party in Pakistan's history that does proper political fundraising. We have a 40,000 database of our donors. Other parties have nothing. And we keep telling them that, look, we are the ones who, everything is on record. They have been trying to find out something in our funding case for almost 6 years. So neither will I be getting disqualified in the funding case, and certainly not in this Tosha Khana case, which is too ridiculous to explain to you. But we are in court, and I'm confident that they'll be brushed aside by the court. But there is a desperation. They've just done another terrorism case on me. So they might, God knows, they might try something else. I have had 24 cases against me right now. Can you hear me?
Yes, apologies, it's the Wi-Fi.
Was I talking to myself?
No, I think we heard a bit. It was just towards the end part that you cut out.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Next question.
The Pakistani Wi-Fi.
Which bit did you hear and which you didn't hear? I don't, where did I start talking to myself?
I think generally we heard. I think you covered the point in general, and I think it's sufficiently clear that that you of course, do not agree with this decision, and you want to, of course, that you will be rerunning and that you will be contesting this decision in any case, and it's that you believe that it's ridiculous. I think that's a satisfactory answer. So I think I'll move on to sort of the next question, which is slightly more of a difficult conversation, I guess, but it's a conversation that is to be had, especially in the context of Pakistan, which is to do with the military and the politics of Pakistan. Now, your government has had good relations with the military, or had good relations with the military when in power. After the no confidence vote and after a series of events, your party distanced itself from, and in some instances it was said to have spoken against the military. What is your stance on the military's involvement in the country's politics and in the country's running?
So look, first of all, let me say, Pakistan became a security state when we came into existence, because there was a fear in Pakistan that we have a neighbor who's 7 times the size of our country, much more resourceful. And immediately after independence, the next year, 47 we were independent, 48 there was a conflict with India on Kashmir. So that framed the mindset of our country, because the fear that a huge neighbor can easily overwhelm us. So the military naturally in such circumstances gained more importance. And then we had martial laws. So we've had 3 martial laws where the military took over when they thought that the civilian governments weren't doing well. Now, the problem with this is that, we have never had an extended run of democracy. So that balance that should be in a society between bearing in mind we are a security state, so the balance between the military establishment and a civilian government, that balance has never really been there. So what happens is that when you have a democratic government, the responsibility lies with the democratic government to deliver. But the democratic government does not have all the power. So it does not always have all the authority. So unless authority and responsibility lie in one place, it's very difficult for any management system to work. Now, I'll give you just one example where, in fact, I had a very good relationship with the military establishment. There were no problems between us. In fact, it was a complementary relationship. But the one area where I had this problem was because I had been campaigning for 22 years when I came into power, that the powerful must be held accountable. They must be brought under the law. So action must be taken against them. So they were openly stealing money, laundering money out of country, living in these palatial palaces or huge luxury flats in London, money stolen from this country, and never giving any money trail or source of income. How did they acquire this great wealth? So we saw them. I knew these 2 families for the last 40 years, and I saw these rags to riches stories where they never had this sort of money, but suddenly they're worth billions of dollars now, lying in outside Pakistan. So my point was that these 2 corrupt families and people associated with them, they should be held accountable, and they were already cases pending in our Accountability Bureau. So all I was asking them was that action must be taken. Now, unfortunately, the Accountability Bureau was not in my hands. So I would, and they were controlled by the establishment. Now I would keep telling them that, look, take action against these people. But unfortunately, for some reason, the establishment's views on corruption were completely different to mine. They did not take that seriously. I kept telling them that no country